45 years of Gundam, dozens of factions. Every one of them believes it is the side worth fighting for. Here is what they actually are. Let's break this down. Earth Federation. The Earth Federation is the oldest and most persistent institution in the Gundam franchise, a unified Earth government formed before the Universal Century as a response to overpopulation, resource wars, and the existential pressure of a planet struggling under the weight of its own human population. Its founding premise was rational. Distribute humanity into space colonies at the Lagrangian points to relieve Earth's burden and create governed, organized expansion beyond the atmosphere. What the Earth Federation became is what most large governments become when unchallenged long enough. The interests of the people who run it and the interests of the people who live under it separate. The Federation's power base is Earthnoid, the people who remained on Earth, and its political structure consistently undervalues the people who did what it asked and colonized space. Colonial populations pay taxes, provide resources, and receive military protection that functions as the enforcement arm of Earth's economic preferences. When colonists complain, the Federation calls it unrest. When unrest becomes organization, it calls it sedition. When sedition produces a military movement, the Federation sends the Titans. What the Earth Federation does across the Universal Century is not unusual in human history. It is a government that was built to solve one problem, solved it, and then spent the rest of its existence trying to preserve the power it accumulated in solving it. The wars that follow, with Zeon, with the Titans' victims, with successive Neo-Zeon movements, with Hathaway's terrorist network in 0105, are all downstream of the Federation's structural refusal to extend to its colonial populations the same political legitimacy it extended to its founding Earth-based members. It is never defeated. It is never reformed. It outlasts every challenger while slowly accumulating the corruption that will eventually require another challenger, Principality of Zeon. Zeon Zum Daikun was a politician and philosopher who developed a theory called Kontilism. The idea that humanity's migration into space was not merely a logistical solution to Earth's overpopulation, but the next stage in human evolution, that the people born in the colonies were developing into something new. And that their connection to the confined gravity-bound consciousness of Earth was holding them back. He declared Side 3, the colony cluster at Lagrange Point 2, independent from the Earth Federation as the Republic of Zeon. Then he died in UC 0068 in circumstances that remained suspicious. Digwin Soto Zabi, his closest advisor and the head of a powerful political family within Side 3, claimed that Daikun named him successor on his deathbed. What followed was the purge of Daikun loyalists, the abolition of the Republic, and the establishment of the Principality of Zeon, a hereditary monarchy controlled by Degwin and his 5 children, with Daikun's philosophy preserved as propaganda and stripped of its content. Girin Zabi, the eldest child, builds a military machine and a cult of personality around his own image. His speeches sound like Daikon's words, wearing Daikun's clothes, with a different body inside. The war against the Earth Federation that Girin launches in January, UC 0079, kills half of humanity's total population in its opening week through colony drops and nerve gas attacks against civilian populations. The Principality of Zeon commits these atrocities in the name of Space-Noid liberation. Its founding philosopher advocated for Space-Noid liberation. The distance between those two facts is the distance between what Zeon claimed to be and what Zeon actually was, and the franchise has spent 45 years examining that distance from every possible angle. Titans and AEUG. The Earth Federation wins the one-year war and immediately begins building the conditions for the next one. Operation Stardust in UC 0083, in which Zeon remnants steal a nuclear-armed Gundam prototype and drop a colony on North America, provides the political justification for the Federation Council to authorize a new elite force. The Titans are established to hunt down Zeon remnants and colonial insurgents, given broader legal authority than the regular Federation military, and handed this authority without adequate oversight. What the Titans become within 4 years of their founding is the precise thing they were built to prevent: a military organization that treats colonial civilians as the enemy, enforces Earth's political dominance over the colonies through violence, and operates outside the law it is ostensibly defending. The trigger for the AEUG's formation is one specific atrocity. In UC-0087, the Titans suppress a peaceful demonstration at Side 1's 30-bunch colony by pumping G3 nerve gas into the colony's atmosphere. 10 million people die. The AEUG, Anti-Earth Union Group, coalesces from Federation dissidents, colonial independence advocates, former Zeon moderates, and defecting Federation officers who recognize that the institution they serve has become what they were supposed to be fighting. The AEUG is not a government and does not pretend to be. It is a coalition built around a single principle: the Titans must stop. That clarity of purpose, while minded one enemy, one goal, gives it operational coherence that a more complex political program might not. The Grips conflict is the outcome, and what the AEUG wins at the end of it is a federation without Titans, which is not the same as a federation that has changed. Neo-Zeon, Haman and Char. Zeon loses the 1-year war. The survivors who do not accept the armistice's terms retreat to the asteroid axis, the Zeon military base beyond the asteroid belt, and wait. By UC-0088, the remnant forces at Axis declare themselves Neo-Zeon under the nominal leadership of Minerva Lao Zabi, the last surviving child of the Zabi family, who is 8 years old, and the actual leadership of her regent Haman Karn, a woman who has spent years holding together a disparate collection of Zeon loyalists, opportunists, and true believers through sheer force of will and political intelligence. Haman's Neo-Zeon uses the chaos of the Grips conflict's aftermath to seize Axis and launch a two-front campaign against both the weakened Earth Federation and the exhausted AEUG. Her goal is not Daekun's liberation philosophy, it is power. Zabi power restored, the space colonies under Zeon's authority, the Federation humbled. She drops the colony Dublin on Earth as a demonstration. She very nearly wins. She loses to Judao Ashta, who refuses to let her ideology of domination be the answer to the Federation's ideology of control. 5 years later, in UC-0093, a second Neo-Zeon movement emerges under Char Aznable, who reveals that he is Casval Rem Daekun, the dead philosopher's son, with a program more radical than anything Haman attempted: drop Axis onto Earth, trigger nuclear winter, force humanity into space. This Neo-Zeon does not want to govern the Earth. It wants to remove the option of remaining on it. Char's counterattack is the franchise's most concentrated examination of what happens when a legitimate grievance, the Federation's structural injustice toward colonial populations, passes through trauma, loss, and unchecked bitterness, and comes out the other side as a plan to kill everyone who disagreed: Neo-Zeon remnants, Lundo Bell, and Anaheim Electronics. The wars do not end when they end. The universal century generates organizations that persist long past the conflicts that created them, and the UC's later entries are as much about institutional aftermath as about active combat. Lundo Bell is the Earth Federation's response to the Titans' failure, a special task force built from AEUG veterans and Federation regulars, intended to handle future emergencies with less brutality and more competence than its predecessor. It works moderately well. It stops Char's colony drop. It cannot prevent the various Neo-Zeon remnant factions from continuing to operate in the post-0093 political vacuum. By UC-0096, the Sleeves, the remaining Neo-Zeon faction loyal to the memory of Full Frontal, are pursuing the Laplace's Box, a document from the Federation's founding that could legally rewrite the political relationship between Earth and the colonies. Anaheim Electronics, the Federation's primary mobile suit manufacturer, is simultaneously arming every faction in every conflict of the UC timeline and profiting from all of them. A corporation that has survived Zeon, the Titans, multiple Neo-Zeon movements, and the gradual decomposition of the Federation itself by maintaining the key or specific position of the merchant who sells weapons to both sides, and survives by being too economically necessary to eliminate. The UC's later entries are not simple stories of heroes versus villains. They are studies in institutional entropy. How the organizations built to protect people gradually stopped doing that while maintaining the paperwork that says they still are. G Gundam, the Gundam Fight Nations. Future Century represents the franchise's most radical reimagining of the political premise. In this timeline, the nations of Earth have agreed to settle their political disputes not through war, which they recognized was destroying the planet, but through a quadrennial tournament called the Gundam Fight, in which each nation's space colony sends a representative Gundam to Earth for elimination combat. The winner's nation governs the colonies for the next 4 years. The structure is satirical even within its own fictional world, replacing war with organized violence and calling it progress. The nations are caricatures designed to show how international politics flattens diverse populations into stereotypes. Neo-France fights with fencing, Neo-Mexico with a Gundam wearing a sombrero, Neo-China with martial arts forms. The Gundam Fight is the world's governments agreeing that combat is legitimate, that it should be regulated, and that this makes it better. The Devil Gundam, built to restore Earth's environment through self-replicating nanomachines corrupted by its journey through orbit, now consuming everything adjacent to it, is the franchise's answer to the question of what happens when a system built to prevent violence succeeds only in displacing it. The nations are not the problem in G Gundam. The structure that lets nations reduce everything to a tournament is the problem because it takes a catastrophe beyond the tournament's scope to reveal that the tournament was always the wrong solution. USA, OZ, Romefeller, and White Fang. After Colony 195, and the political structure of the Gundam Wing universe is layered in ways the series reveals slowly. The United Earth Sphere Alliance is the surface government, a military regime that consolidated global power by ending a period of international conflict and then never stopped behaving as if the conflict required continued suppression. Beneath it, the Romefeller Foundation, a cabal of wealthy European aristocrats who are the alliance's real sponsors, and who hold the genuine conviction that the common population is incapable of self-governance and requires management by its social betters. OZ, the organization of the Zodiac, is Romefeller's military instrument, officially an elite special forces division of the Alliance, functioning as the means by which the Foundation's preferences become the Alliance's policy. Trees Kushranada leads OZ and disagrees with Romefeller on one specific question: the Mobile Doll program, which deploys autonomous unmanned mobile suits in combat, which Trees considers an obscenity against the human experience of war. His objection is aristocratic in its own way. War must be felt, must cost the people fighting it, or it means nothing. But it is genuine. When OZ stages its coup against the Alliance and then Romefeller replaces Trees, White Fang emerges as a colonial response. The colony's own military movement led by the charismatic and nihilistic Zex Merquise, whose plan for peace is the mutual annihilation of Earth and the colonies so neither side can oppress the other again. The After Colony universe stacks ideology upon ideology to demonstrate that every power structure generates the resistance that eventually destroys it. Earth Alliance, ZAFT, and the Orb Union. The cosmic era divides humanity along genetic lines more explicitly than any previous timeline. The Earth Alliance represents the majority of the human population that remained unmodified, naturals, and governs Earth while containing within it the extremist organization Blue Cosmos, whose explicit goal is the annihilation of all coordinators. ZAFT, the Zodiac Alliance of Freedom Treaty, is the military arm of Plant, the orbital colony network where most coordinators live, and it functions simultaneously as a liberation organization and an increasingly militarized state whose leadership is as willing to escalate as the alliance it opposes. The war between them is not a war of ideas. It is a war of existential fear. Each side is genuinely convinced the other intends its elimination, and both sides have the capability and willingness to act on that fear. The Orb Union occupies the moral position that the series uses to examine what neutrality costs. A nation that refuses to take sides, that refuses to build mobile suits for either faction, that burns its own military research facility rather than let it fall into Alliance hands, and that is invaded anyway because the Alliance cannot permit a neutral that will not become an ally. Seed. Destiny adds Chairman Gilbert Durandal's Plant government as the faction that attempts to replace existential warfare with genetic destiny, proposing to resolve the conflict between coordinators and naturals by assigning every person a role determined by their genomic profile. The franchise's response to this proposal is delivered by Kira Yamato's beam rifle, which is a succinct editorial position. Celestial Being and the A-Laws. Mobile Suit. Gundam 00 builds its central faction around the most uncomfortable premise any Gundam series has attempted. What if the heroes are a private paramilitary organization that intervenes in every armed conflict on the planet, attacking all sides simultaneously with the stated goal of eliminating war itself? Celestial Being is not a government, not a resistance movement, not a response to any specific injustice. It is a 200-year-old plan developed by the physicist Aeolia Schenberg, built around Gundams powered by GN drives that produce theoretically unlimited energy, and executed by 4 pilots who each carry personal damage from the conflicts they are now fighting to end. The series refuses to let Celestial Being's goal justify its methods cleanly. Its interventions destabilize political structures without replacing them. Its attacks on all combatants produce temporary ceasefires and permanent resentment. The 3 power blocks it targets, the Human Reform League, the AEU, and the Union, unite against Celestial Being instead of against each other, forming the United Nations forces and defeating the organization at the end of the first season. What rises from the UN forces consolidation is the A-Laws, a designated enforcement division with authority to suppress any opposition to the New World government, which commits atrocities with efficiency that the previous fragmented conflicts managed only accidentally. The A-Laws are what Celestial Being's intervention produced. The second season's thesis is that removing a system of organized violence without removing the power relationships underneath it only concentrates the violence in whoever controls the next system. Gjallarhorn, and Teiwaz. The post-disaster world has already had its catastrophe. The Calamity War, fought 3 centuries before Iron-Blooded Orphans begins, nearly ended humanity through autonomous mobile armor AI. The organizations that formed to stop it became the power structure that governs the solar system, Gjallarhorn, named for the Norse war horn that signals the end of the world, built from the 7 families whose founders destroyed the most mobile armors. 3 centuries of peace have transformed those families into a self-perpetuating aristocracy that enforces order through the credible threat of a military monopoly, while gradually accumulating the corruption that monopolies generate in the absence of accountability. Gjallarhorn does not govern. It maintains, it suppresses. It sells its protection to the 4 Earth economic blocks and the outer sphere colonies in exchange for the political deference that keeps the 7 stars in power. Teiwaz, the criminal-adjacent organization that serves as the franchise's portrayal of organized crime as de facto governance in the outer sphere, provides the structure that fills the space Gjallarhorn cannot occupy, without acknowledging that the outer sphere exists as something other than a resource extraction zone. Tekkadan is neither of these things. It is 20 orphaned child soldiers who seized an opportunity and built something real. And the tragedy of Iron-Blooded Orphans is the systematic demonstration that systems of power do not negotiate with things that are real. They negotiate with things that are useful, and when things stop being useful, they eliminate them. Benerit Group and the corporate Spacians. The Ad Stella timeline arrives at a conclusion that the other timelines have implied but never stated as explicitly as the premise. In The Witch from Mercury, the governments are corporations. The Benerit Group is the solar system's dominant arms manufacturer, a conglomerate of mobile suit development companies whose internal competition for market dominance shapes interplanetary politics more directly than any governmental body. The conflict between Spacians, people born in the orbital colonies who are the workforce and executive class of the space economy, and Earthians, people on the degraded Earth surface who are the underclass of a system that extracted their planet's resources to build someone else's prosperity, is not framed as a political dispute with a political solution. It is the operating condition of a society run by entities whose incentive structure does not include the welfare of people who cannot pay for their products. Astacassia School of Technology, where the series is set, is a corporate academy where mobile suit duels replace competitive procurement. Companies sponsor student pilots to demonstrate their mobile suits' capabilities, and winning duels generates contracts. The school is the military-industrial complex made literal, a campus where the children of corporate executives compete for their parents' market share. Soletta Mercury, arriving from the outer reaches with a Gundam built on forbidden technology, enters this system without understanding it and discovers that the forbidden technology was forbidden because it was built on the bodies of children who were used as test subjects and who nobody in power was willing to acknowledge because acknowledgement would cost money. The Moon Race, Earth Militia, and the Correct Century. The Correct Century does not have a villain. It has two exhausted civilizations separated by hundreds of years of enforced isolation, brought back into contact by the decision of the Moon Race's queen to reclaim the Earth, and immediately producing exactly the kind of conflict that decision was always going to produce. The Moon Race lived on the moon for centuries after the Dark History's final catastrophe, maintaining advanced technology waiting for Earth to recover. Earth recovered to approximately the technological level of 1910, steam engines, early aircraft, no mobile suits, and developed a culture built around whatever could be grown from that specific soil. The Earth Militia is the military formed from that culture. Rural soldiers, cavalry, farmers with guns, fighting against Moon Race mobile suits with black powder weapons and traps, and the terrain knowledge of people who have never left. Loran Sihak is a Moon Race member who has spent 2 years living on Earth and loves both worlds, which makes him the only person in the conflict position to understand both sides and the only person nobody fully trusts. For all, Gundam's political argument is the oldest and most honest in the franchise. There is no political solution to the problem of two groups of people who each believe the ground they are standing on is legitimately theirs. What Tomino offers instead of a solution is Loran's choice: to use the turn A to seal the catastrophic weapons away again rather than let either side win with them, which is not victory. It is the refusal to let winning be the point, in a franchise that has spent 20 years asking whether winning was ever the right question.